Hi, and welcome to Session 2, Workshop 6, Bilingüe y Translanguaging in Children, Middle Grade, and YA Latinx Literature. If you are enjoying the learning today, you can pay the joy forward by going to the Ed Collab site and finding out how you can donate to the Brotherhood Sister Soul, our adopted charity for the day. Because the Ed Collab gathering is a day of free learning, we invite you to donate what you would have spent on coffee, lunch, or even registration for an amazing day like this to pay it forward to support others. Today, we welcome Carla Espana and Luz Herrera for their session, Bilingüe y Translanguaging in Children, Middle Grade, and YA Latinx Literature. Carla Espana is a member of the Educator Collaborative Network. She's also the Bilingual Education Clinical Doctoral Lecturer at Hunter College, City University of New York. Her work focuses on the ways bilingual students make meaning of their schooling, focusing on issues of translanguaging and culturally sustaining pedagogy in reading and writing workshop classes. Joining her is Luz Herrera, Assistant Professor of Literacy, Early Bilingual, and Special Education in the Kremen School of Education at Fresno State University. Her teaching and research are in linguistically and culturally sustaining approaches to teaching emergent bilingual learners, engaging in translanguaging and critical pedagogy in the classroom, and bilingual education policy. If you're on Twitter today, friends, you can join or you can share your learning using the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, a space, and hashtag 6. And now, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Carla Espana and Luz Herrera.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be joined by mi hermana en la lucha, right, Luz Herrera. We're so excited to be able to join you again, and with this session titled Bilingüe y which has been like our approach to our lives as we learn to clap back to all of those who don't welcome our humanity in the classroom. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about how translanguaging in children's literature, middle grade novels, and YA texts really helps us create spaces. Not only just for as educators in our instruction, but also as readers for our own lives, for our students. And yes, like Jessica said, please join us on Twitter with our hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, space #6 if you have any questions. And of course, you can reach out to me on Twitter with my Twitter handle @Profesora Espana. Unfortunately, I did not have the ñ there. So yes, you can do that. And Luz, go ahead, you could join us.
Yes, hi Carla, and thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. Again, my name is Luz Herrera, and you can also find me on Twitter at Doctora, that's DRA _ Luz Yadira, LUZYADIRA. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sharing the screen.
Carla, your mic is muted.
Yes, it is muted. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. I can hear you now. Okay, so we're going to look at a little bit of few visuals that Luz is going to share right now. And wanted to talk a little bit about the terms in the presentation. And we're using the term translanguaging, and Luz and I will discuss it a little bit here. And our approach to translanguaging, and we're really hopeful in having the space that we can talk about it, is that it helps us disrupt the traditional way of schooling and the traditional way of viewing language or languaging and how we engage languages. And so I'd like for us to consider moving away from this kind of understanding, which sees as speakers possessing one or more language systems. It views, the traditional way views languages as these separate entities, and that speakers possess them, and you switch from one language to another. And what we're asking you today is take this leap with us and engage us in this kind of thinking from the perspective of those of us who are bilingual, who are multilingual, who engage with our language practices this way, where we say that we have one linguistic repertoire and we just pull different features from it. And if you need a visual, maybe this meme will help, right? And helping us remember that we need to consider students' entire linguistic repertoire. I highly encourage you to go back at another time. And if you didn't get to see Elizabeth Acevedo's keynote, She talks about this throughout in terms of the experiences with her schooling and how her practices and experiences weren't welcomed. And also check out the Q&A at the end where she discusses the use of authentic language practices. And so this is our entry point into translanguaging as disruptive of what traditional schooling practices have been.
Thank you, Carla. And so before we can do that, right, we have to understand first the various components of a translanguaging pedagogy. And Ophelia Garcia, of course, Ibarra, Johnson, and Seltzer laid out really nicely in their book, The Translanguaging Classroom. And they talk about the various components of this translanguaging pedagogy. And before you can engage in any kind of translanguaging pedagogy and create translanguaging spaces in your own classroom, first you have to have what Garcia, Ibarra, Johnson, and Seltzer have called a translanguaging stance. And the translanguaging stance, you have to be clear about your own positioning, your beliefs on the learning experiences that your students deserve, right? In this case, a teacher that takes a translanguaging stance believes that their students come with resources and assets, as Elizabeth Acevedo said earlier as well, reminded us, right? A teacher that believes that language is an asset and validates and honors students' voices and uses those strengths as a resource in their teaching. And once you have that framework set, then you can move on to the next two areas, which are translanguaging design and the translanguaging shift. And the translanguaging design is something that you can think about design when you think about planning something from the start. And as a teacher or as teachers, we have our lesson plans. So how can we make an explicit plan to ensure that students have those opportunities to make meaningful connections between their home and community language practices and those that are often demanded by school settings, right? And we will discuss in a bit about how you might do this through the use of literature, right? Children's literature, middle grade literature, as well as YA lit. And finally, we have translanguaging shifts. And shifts are those moment-by-moment teaching moves or teaching decisions, those teachable moments that arise and you have to act on in order to build on those student assets. And this is something that we can always, this is an ongoing process. We forever are learning about this. I'm still learning and really growing in these areas, of course. But I think the important thing is to remember that first we have to really, really understand and have that positioning set in the first place, or else the other things are not going to be able to really come as easily as they might be able to. So the translanguaging stance is really important. You have to take a stance in your classroom and decide what kind of teacher you want to be and what kind of teacher you think that your students deserve.
And I'm always appreciative of my conversations with you, Luz, about how this is a journey that we continue to be on. I think it also reflects our approach to language practices, and that you can never fully learn a language because you're always practicing and engaging in language practices. And I think it's also telling of how toxic sometimes our schooling has been and our experiences in schools have been, because they haven't welcomed students' full humanity and all of their identities in the classroom. And so that has meant that for some of us, it's meant that we have been shamed because of the way we are, the way we exist, the way we present ourselves. And so this is going to be an ongoing process. And I'm teaching a course that I've been teaching for a few years called Bilingual Literacy. And one of our first assignments in a teacher preparation program with bilingual teachers that we have is we go over our autobiography. An autobiography that's focused and we think through the lens of our identity, zooming into our language practices as bilingual beings or multilingual beings. And there are a lot of tears that are shed in that course and throughout the semester. And there's a lot of healing that happens as we have these conversations, just like we have with each other. And I just want to show, if you can show the next slide, another resource with the CUNY NICEP has set up this resource. And I'm just really thankful that we have these resources available. So Lucy, you want to tell them a little bit about where they can go and what they'll find there?
Yes, absolutely. So CUNY NICEB is a New York State initiative on emerging bilinguals, and it is this state sponsored initiative through the City University of New York. And what the goal, I was fortunate enough to be part of that research team. But the goal was to think about the ways that we can support schools in teaching emergent bilingual students, and support schools, support teachers, leaders, on how to use things like translanguaging, creating a multilingual a landscape in the school so that students and the community feels welcome. It's a reflection of an extension of their home, right? So there's amazing resources in the CUNY NICEB website. It's CUNY NICEB or cuny-niceb.org, and we'll be tweeting it out in a little bit. But they have webinars that speak on this specifically. There are teaching videos that specifically show how teachers can engage or have engaged in translanguaging practices in the classroom. And you'll see 3 of these teachers featured here that you see on the slide, Charlene and Gladys and Ulda Yao. Yes, Carla?
I'm like, there's one more teacher, but I didn't get him in the picture. So yes, you get access to a few videos, because I'm often asked for like video examples of what this looks like in the classroom. So that's why we just wanted to share that.
Yeah, Andy Brown is not in the screenshot, but he's one of the teachers that teaches in an ESL setting in Queens. And it's always a great one because it shows how teachers who are not speakers of other languages can engage. Or he does speak some languages to an extent, right? But if you're not fully, or if you're not bilingual yourself, or not considering yourself bilingual, then you can still use translanguaging in your classroom. And there's actually a whole web series that Sarah Vogel hosts that talks about how to teach a bilingual student, even if you're not one, right? So we pulled this chart here on the right because this is from Gladys Aponte's class, and Gladys is a doctoral student at the CUNY Graduate Center, and she used to teach for many years. And I'm not sure if she's still teaching, but I hope she's still teaching to an extent, right? But this chart is from her classroom, and she talks about the various reasons why we might use translanguaging. Why we might use translanguaging. So you can see some examples here. Maybe you might use for translanguaging to express una palabra de cariño, right? Some sort of I can't even say it in English. Some sort of I don't know, in terms of endearment. Maybe to show dialogue, and we'll show some examples from the literature, maybe to make some sort of emphasis on something, which actually we have some examples of, maybe for some humor, to express humor, maybe to show a character, like the character of the not the character, the character of the character, el carácter del personaje, right? That makes sense, right? A little bit.
Yeah, like character traits.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you.
Well, see, even you in reading this chart is an example of what we do in the classroom as well, right? And so sometimes I've had text excerpts, or I have mentor texts that are showing features mostly in English, and then I am in my bilingual classroom and we discuss them using our full linguistic repertoire, and that might mean that we pull from a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of English, and so we'll talk a little bit about spaces that separate and don't allow that later. But so even what you were doing now, I was like, yes, that's exactly what we do in the classroom.
Do you want to add anything else on this chart or anything?
No, I think we can move on to the other term we just wanted to address, because it's on our title, and it's been really important considering in my teacher preparation program, is Latinx or Latinx. And there have been a lot of conversations, especially on why moving to a term that doesn't say Latina or Latino, and talking about the need to not always express ourselves, especially with Spanish having these gendered words. And so this was, I'm thankful for this excerpt that we're sharing with you, and we'll also share out on Twitter the link. And that's a shout out to my lovely partner who's always sharing great resources with me. So, shout out to our partners who are supportive and sharing. And also, expanding my own knowledge about how this term is continued to be used and how do we do it right. So I love here Alan Pales Lopez, who says here, and I'll just read that those two bolded parts, that the X is attempting to speak to the violences of colonization, slavery against women and femmes, and the fact that many of us experience such an intense displacement and silence that we have no language in which to articulate who we are. And then I really appreciated from this article the challenge and the push for saying, encouraging us and to ask ourselves, what are we doing with this? And so what have I done to show up for Black, Indigenous women and femmes of the Latin American diaspora today? So we will be tweeting that link out, and just keeping in mind our words truly matter. And so we have to be mindful of what they mean and how these meanings sometimes don't get expressed well. And so I think it's important to see what we mean by those terms.
Thank you. So we're going to get started in looking into the actual literature that we're talking about today. So we want to just point out two guiding questions that we're going to be sort of referring back to and just guiding us through our conversations about these books. The first one is, how does the author or text use translanguaging? How can we include conversations on language practices and or the use of translanguaging in texts in our teaching? So those are the two questions that we'll be coming back to as we go through the various books that we have selected for you all today.
So the first set that we're looking through is the latest release from Yuyi Morales. So thankful for her illustrations, the stories that she shares with us in her writing, and in her latest, in Soñadores, in Español, or Dreamers in English. We have the journey with her son that she tells us to the US, and dealing with these challenges of setting, but also challenges of how you are received or not received when you come to these spaces, and the role that reading and libraries and telling stories really plays. And so one example to read from here as she goes through her journey, where she says, and we made it to the other side, thirsty in awe, unable to go back, we became immigrants. Migrantes, you and I. The sky and the land welcomed us in words unlike those of our ancestors. And at the end, she ends towards the end saying, we are stories, we are two languages, we are lucha, we are resilience, we are hope, we are dreamers, soñadores of the world. And I'm really thankful for the way that Yuyi uses translanguaging, and just how her entire linguistic repertoire is shown in her text. And we can say and do a study with students, right, as to how certain words might be left in the English version of the book, and how they're left in Spanish. So we have migrantes, we have lucha, we have soñadores. And so I've had wonderful conversations with my own students, both in schools I visit and also adults in the teacher ed programs, on how when they heard the word lucha and I was reading the text in English, it immediately reminded them of really movements, historical movements that they're familiar with, and movements right now, right? And so it's been really beautiful to see how it's used there. I want to show you another example, and we go to the next slide, with an early chapter book that I was using with third graders last year. And I'm so excited because Juana Medina is also getting, we're going to hear more from Juana y Lucas in Juana Medina's next part of the series now. It's Juana y Lucas' Big Problems. But this excerpt is from Juana y Lucas. And it's such a beautiful book. And I love the fact that the main character, because of Juana Medina's background and coming from Colombia. And I love how the main character, she's in Bogota, and I see all these descriptions and references to her local community. And of course, because we're talking of our literacy community here today, just wanted to share this excerpt where the character, loves reading, and she'll say, sometimes mommy will come into my room and tell me to turn off the light, ya mismo, just when the stories I'm reading are absolutely impossible to put down. And thank goodness my abuelo gave me a flashlight to use in case of an emergency. And I just really encourage you to take a look. The illustrations are lovely, and a Pura Belpré award-winning book. It's great for our students who are just starting with their chapter books, right? And it's great for character study as well.
So this book is a side-by-side bilingual book. It's by Jorge Argueta, and it's called Somos las Nubes, or We Are the Clouds. And I'm going to read the version on the left, and you can follow along with either version if you'd like. La arena del desierto. Es bien suavecita la arena del desierto. Me recuerda las playas de El Salvador. Dice el señor Coyote que pronto llegaremos. A mí me dan ganas de regresarme a ver a mi papi. Cuando esté con mi mami, te vamos a mandar un beso, igual o más grande que la luna. I think I skipped a whole line, but when I read this and when we were working on this slide, actually, like, I could not. It was very difficult to just even type it out. I skipped. Él se quedó llorando, ya no llores, papi. I don't know if it was my own internal psyche that skipped it, but it really, this story or this collection of poetry that you can find in this book is just really beautiful. It's amazing, but in a way, it's also devastating. And Jorge Argueta, he's a poet from El Salvador, and he fled the country, El Salvador, when he was young, and during the 80s and during the Civil War. It was just a really terrible time in history. And if you're aware, you know that the events, what events led to this disastrous war. And Argueta is really well known for his bilingual literature, poetry books specifically. This is another one of his that is one of my favorites as well, A Movie in My Pillow, Una Película en Mi Almohada. And he seems to usually have bilingual poems side by side, as we see in this book here. And in this text, Somos como las nubes, we are like the clouds. The poems are in Espanol, as you see, right? And they're translated into English by Elisa Amado for this specific book. The poems, as you see, they appear side by side. And I think it's really strategic and I think meaningful that the Spanish version, the original Spanish version, comes first, or, first if they're side by side, or at the top if they're top down. And you see here, as in the screen, or as, let me go back to the screen actually so you can look at it. As you see here in this example, translanguaging is used in the English version. And in this case, the word coyote remains unchanged. It's not italicized. And if we remember what we heard from Elizabeth Acevedo, she also uses something similar in her, a similar approach in her own work, right? We don't italicize. We don't italicize when we're saying things, right, out loud. When I text my mom, I don't italicize, or my parents. And that was a really nice reminder. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So again, this particular book is a collection of poetry that reflects the voices of thousands of children from Central America fleeing the violence in their countries, many times alone, and just seeking to find refuge in El Norte, the US. And the collection of poems just reflects the feelings of loss and fear, uncertainty, but also, and I think that's really important, the hopes and the dreams of young people for a safer, a better life. And the illustrations by Alfonso Ruano are just beyond moving. It's just a beautiful book to look at, but it's also, like I said, quite devastating as well, because it's so difficult to imagine our children, enduring such just disastrous events and experiences. But it's also something that we're bearing witness to today, right? So it's important to also not hide these things from children, and expose our children, our students, to things like this. And it's just a beautiful book. And we'll talk about how you might be able to use books like this and others in the classroom more specifically.
I wanted to share some books. I know with time I can't talk about them all, but Duncan Tonatiuh is our next author, and I used separate is never equal a lot in several classrooms, and even the teachers in my program, when they plan their read alouds and lesson plans off of text, and that seems to be one of the classroom favorites to plan with. So shout out to those teachers who've also been sharing so many of their beautiful read alouds with me, and we're learning together. Specifically, I just wanted to show you how these texts, what I really appreciate a lot with Duncan Tonatiu's work, besides the amazing illustrations, really is that he takes stories that sometimes maybe we don't have a lot or hear a lot about in schools, and he really validates them and validates these traditions and these stories. So we have here not only, just like I'm going to show with a middle grade example with David Bowles later, but he uses words that are not just only in Spanish, but then also reflect language practices of the communities and of those antepasados from these communities. And just so you see how some of them, it's really interesting when you do a study. That's why we wanted to show you some excerpts so you get an idea. In some texts, they might be translated right there. Sometimes you will have to keep reading, and like Elizabeth was saying earlier in her in the keynote, that we use the context. So here we look on the right hand side towards the last part of the sentence. Well, it says, "I will stay by your side no matter what, as long as Tonatiuh rises." So we can guess from the context clue what might be said there. And I really think that not only just picking the text because the topics are also super engaging for our students, but also making sure that we're also with the text noticing and doing these kind of studies of how words are being used. And definitely need you all to look at his Undocumented: A Worker's Fight latest release as well.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about translanguaging and how translanguaging is featured or used in middle grade texts. And again, we're going to keep in mind the same guiding questions that we posed before, right? How does the author or the text use translanguaging? And how can we include conversations on language practices and or the use of translanguaging in text in our teaching? And the first book we look at here in this grade level or this grade band is Guadalupe Garcia McCall.
Yes, and I love how you're like the first book, but then I know when we were planning this, I said I can't narrow it down to one book because I see this in all of our books. So maybe we should have just called this like author studies, or because we've done text sets before. And please, just everyone, go look at Guadalupe Garcia McCall's text. And thank you, David Bowles, for translating El Verano de las Mariposas to Spanish. And her latest, All the Stars Denied, tells the story that is many times untold about 1.3 million people who specifically Mexican community who were deported in this mass deportation event. And so during the Great Depression. And it's super important that we bring these stories more and more into our classrooms, and to see how she's using translanguaging here with the conversation of a very intense moment here in the beginning of the text, where you see the characters, Cecilia here, where it says, Cecilia, a girl from Colonia Calaveras who hadn't been in school for months. She was clutching the folds of her blue shawl around herself, but she didn't need it. Papa had stoked the furnace earlier and it wasn't cold in the store. Can I help you? I asked. The way she wrapped her arms around herself told me she was scared, so I reached out, offering my open hand to her, palm up. ¿Qué pasa, Cecilia? You're safe here. You don't have to hide. There's just a lot of use of a full language repertoire in throughout all her writing, so definitely encourage you to check that one out.
The next book that we're highlighting, an author, is Meg Medina's Mercy Suarez Changes Gears. And I keep going back to Elizabeth Acevedo because, I really loved how a lot of the things that she said, I hope that we are able to support in this presentation, in this workshop. And in this book, it's just about a young girl doing young girl things, right? We're highlighting characters, diverse characters, in this case, a a brown girl, right, doing just regular young girl things. And one of the things, or one of the ways that she uses translanguaging in her book is, you can see here on the slide. And going back to Gladys Aponte's chart, right? How do you use translanguaging? How might we be able to use translanguaging? Well, in this case, you're using translanguaging in a way that, well, you couldn't maybe use it in a different way, or you couldn't even say it in English. Like, for instance, La Abuela right here is a character, and abuelas are often characters that, really are kind of these language brokers. And one of the books that recently came out, actually, we are not featuring it here today, and maybe in the future we will, is called Voices of Resistance. And one of the chapters in that book, and it talks about how the abuela is often a very big character in stories, and how grandchildren are often, negotiate, and they both sort of negotiate their language practices with each other. And translanguaging happens a lot in this engagement, and that the book chapter is by Laura Lamillo, actually. But in this case, let's see, I'm going to read a short excerpt. Last week, Abuela made a fuss because Lolo lost his wallet again. He was sure he'd been pickpocketed at the bakery, and even called Tia Ines to warn her about common criminals eating at the luncheonette where she works. Keep an eye out for thieves, he told her. The world has changed. Trust no one. Turns out he wasn't pickpocketed at all. When Abuela found his billfold in the bed of Lantana, he'd been weeding that afternoon. Ay, 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 qué escándalo! Her volume button got stuck on high, and the whole block could hear her yelling about how he had to pay more attention. So, typical sort of, this is a very common way, actually, of using translanguaging in literature, right? To sort of represent the authentic voice of the characters in the story, kind of to highlight something, or to make some sort of emphasis on something. So, ay, 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 qué escándalo. I don't know if she could be able to say or convey the same feeling in another language, right? So she's using her own, how her abuela would actually say it, perhaps, right?
And it reminds me of Gladys's chart from her 4th grade classroom that you showed from the CUNY NISA website, because of the different uses. And I have to, remind people to check out those video clips, specifically the little video clips on how Gladys is doing this kind of study that we're just walking through a bunch of text really quickly for you all right now. But Gladys does this in a lesson. And so you get a little bit of the inside view of how students notice the use of language practices in literature. So I want to talk to you about a book that I'm in right now. So David Bowles' Feather Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky. So this was really bittersweet. I'm going to be honest with you reading this, because as I'm reading, I keep thinking back about my 6th graders that I taught in Don Pedro Aviso Campos School in New York for a few years in a bilingual program. And I wish I had this book. It just reminded me of all the times that not only students would love on their own getting books and going to our classroom library and getting books on different kinds of myths. So 6th grade social studies, we did ancient civs, and so we talked about different ones. And I was thankful that I had some books to pull from my classroom library, and students were really excited to do this kind of work. And so as I'm reading this, because I'm still in it, and so join me, those of you, if you want to reach out and we could talk about it, and how I've just been really appreciative of especially this excerpt from David Bowles' introduction, where he talks about how it wasn't until, he took this world literature class in college that he read, a single Aztec or Maya myth. And I really believe that it is our role as educators to be able to create those spaces and include books that might not be on your traditional, canon. And so thank you to the whole team with Disrupt Text who are doing that kind of work right now and engaging us in these conversations. So check out the hashtag Disrupt Text on Twitter. And so back to David Bowles, I'm just thankful that he's bringing in these stories, and also his newest book, They Call Me Güero, has it's poems, and you see also the characters' use of their full linguistic repertoire. So excited for that one as well.
So we've reviewed a few of the middle grade books that we're highlighting today, but we also have YA texts that we'd like to share with you. And we have a number of texts, including one from our keynote speaker today. So I'm really glad we were able to feature her as well. Let me just pull that up in a second.
Yes. So as I was sharing during the Q&A with Elizabeth Acevedo, that some of my students had read her. So we read the Poet X, and with teachers in a bilingual program, that they were first-year teachers. So we read this together. We were reading poems from this together, and we read this one with Mira Muchacha. And it says, Mira Muchacha is mommy's favorite way to start a sentence. And I know I've already done something wrong when she hits me with, look, girl. This time it's Mira Muchacha. Marina from across the street told me you were on the stoop again talking to los vendedores. I'm going to pause right there and just tell you that with that starting line with Mira Muchacha and is mommy's favorite way to start a sentence was a way to start a conversation with the teachers that I'm in the program. And we talked about lines that we're constantly hearing growing up or that we still do from our family members, and what the messages that were being sent, what they meant, and how a lot of those were not all in English, or they were using features of English and Spanish in those lines. And then at the end, what is it that sometimes we would want to tell them, or what would be our response to those? And a lot of the teachers wrote about how they, there were a lot of lines having to do with gender expectations, especially some of them decided not to just focus on their own childhood, but also now as adults and what's expected of them right now. And so I'm really appreciative of the honesty and the authenticity in the Poet X with language practices. And as Elizabeth Acevedo was discussing earlier, it's not just with the use of words that pull features from different kinds of Spanish, but also different kinds of English from our whole language repertoire. And I think it's really important that we continue to provide spaces for that. So we're going to move forward to the next one that Luz is going to discuss. And then at the end, we'll keep talking a little bit about some classroom recommendations.
Yes, I'm so happy to be able to talk briefly about this book. It is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika L. Sanchez. And shout out to Erika for being or staying on the New York Times bestsellers list for a while now.
Yeah.
Really great. And the other day she tweeted something about, shout out to all of the editors and publishing houses that didn't believe a book about a poor brown girl would sell. But, it did. It has, and it's still going strong. So congrats, Erika, for that. So this book, and I'm going to switch my view right here really quickly. This book here, I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, centers on the experiences of Julia. She's a high school student growing up in Chicago, and she wants so much more than the seemingly mundane life of those that she sees around her. But she also believes that she's a disappointment to her family because she refuses to conform to the norms of what she considers to be, that place on a Mexican daughter, quote unquote. And I don't want to give too much away, but this book really takes you on a journey, and it draws you in. You don't want to put the book down, and I think what's really powerful about Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. I'm sorry, I didn't switch back properly. And the ways that she uses translanguaging in her writing, as you can see here, is to really authentically, again, represent the voices of the characters, the people in her life. When I read this, for instance, Angie's mom, Doña Ramona, answers the door and gives me a wet kiss on the cheek. Although I've known her forever, I still get startled because she looks old enough to be Angie's grandma. I'm guessing that on top of having Angie late in life, she also had some tough times. Está acabada, Mama always says. A word that makes me think of an old, dirty dish sponge. Every time I see Doña Ramona, I swear to God, she's wearing an apron. She probably goes to church in it. And then, she goes to this house and it smells like rosa chiles, which is actually that's pretty much what you smell in my house when I visit. And, she's coughing because she's, smelling these roasted chiles. And Doña Ramona says, ay, mija, qué delicada, and she kind of pats her on the back or hits her in the back. Everyone likes to remind me how sensitive I am, as if I didn't know. And she goes on, but it's just, honestly, just reading this, I hear my mother's voice so clearly. These are some of her words, and reading this really just blew me away. I've never read anything like this, honestly, before this. It was like somebody was just looking over my shoulder, peering into my life, and much of what is depicted here is also some of my experience growing up, not in Chicago, but in LA. And luckily, my parents weren't as strict as Julia's. I had a pretty supportive family that did loosen up the leash when they needed to, and they trusted me to do, the things that I wanted to. So I'm really grateful for that. We are running short.
Yes. So I'm going to talk through my next two just together. So first, real quick, Lilian Rivera has just been really inspiring to me in her use of her full language repertoire. And I love the way she just paints a picture of a community. And I feel like I'm there. So I hear, here in this excerpt, dame uno de cherry, I want one de coco, un peso, un dólar, talking about, kids being online to buy a coquito. And so I'm thankful for her. She's just real. And the writing you'll see in the education of Marco Sanchez, which I was like crying at the end in a coffee shop finishing, and super can't wait for Dealing in Dreams. And Luz, do you want to go with Isabel Quintero, and I'll finish after you.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, Isabel Quintero is amazing. She also has a photographic, a graphic novel that she co-wrote with C. Peña, which you can also check out. But we're talking here about Gabby, A Girl in Pieces. And again, she uses translanguaging in really amazing ways as well. And you can see here, she's frustrating she's really frustrated. I'm sorry. I'm trying to rush through. I can't talk. She uses translanguaging here to express her frustration about how others see her and what others' projections of what she is or should be based on the way she looks. In this case, she's a light-skinned person of Mexican descent or Mexican, and she is apparently told that she's not Mexican enough because, she doesn't look Mexican, whatever that is, right? So, she uses, for instance, this idea of like, maybe I should have a nopal en la frente. And that's a very common saying for people that are aware of Mexican descent, or people that are just around Mexican people in general. And this is a way to sort of affirm your identity. Like, don't you see this nopal en my frente? Like, of course I'm Mexican, And anyway, so she uses translanguaging to sort of affirm her identity and really kind of clap back on people that, try to make up things for her, try to form her identity for her. So I think this is a really powerful book in general about just a girl trying to shape her way, shape her life forward, and, just battling through in la lucha.
And I'll end with talking about how in Shadow Shaper, Daniel Jose Older really develops beautiful dialogue, and that's authentic between generations and different families, and so you really have to check that out. And to end, we just want to leave you with some recommendations, where for me, the Circles of Identities activity, where I let students talk about their identities in different language, using different language practices, has been great. And using these texts as mentor texts, and where we study character development, where we see the use of language practices. And Luz has seen the text being used to have discussions on challenges and promises of expanding our language practices and our immigration journeys. So we'll end just by, if Luz, can you put the resources up, and we'll be tweeting those out as well. I think Luz has already been tweeting them with, TweetDeck. They've been going out. So you'll see a few of the resources, and reach out to us on Twitter. We look forward to keeping the conversation going. And we just want to thank you for being in La Lucha with us, and make sure you check out the resources by CUNY NYCEB, Latinx, and Kitle, and it's just been so helpful through these publishers, organizations that have been amplifying these authors. So we thank you so much, and we'll keep being the lucha together, right? And we gotta keep going and expanding our knowledge base of how we can do this in the classrooms, but also teaching in ways that acknowledge the humanity of all students.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and see you all soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carla and Luz. sharing your research on translanguaging, sharing amazing texts that can support that work in the classroom with students. I'm glad that my mic was muted during your session because I was doing a lot of yes, yeah, like cheering when you had like titles up there that I love and that I hope get into the hands of kids. And so, you know, my credit card is going to get a good workout too because there's some that that are new to me. So thank you so much.
And we visit our libraries. You could go to our
my library card gets a good workout too.
Yes, talk to our librarians because they're amazing too.
Absolutely. So amazing resources. Thank you so much for all the hard work that you put into sharing these this time with teachers today. And for those of you who popped in mid-session, if you missed the first few minutes, we will be archiving this video on the EdCollab page. So come back to it, watch it again, share it with your colleagues so we can spread this great work further with those in our field. And I want to share our sessions for the next workshop. So let me pull my screen up real quick to share. In session 3, we have these workshops coming up that will be at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we have about 15 minutes here before our session 3 workshops begin. And you can find links to these workshops back at the EdCollab site. And let's see here. All right, so thank you again for joining us today. Thank you, Carla and Luz. We look forward to following your work on Twitter and with EdCollab. So with that, we will say goodbye.
Thank you.